She didn't cry at the funeral. Her hands stayed folded in her lap, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on the closed lid as if it might move if she watched hard enough. People kept touching her shoulder, whispering how strong she was. How unfair it all felt. Strong. The word pressed against her ribs like something sharp. Across the room, 3 board members stood too close together. Not grieving, calculating. She knew that look. She had seen it before, across conference tables, over signed contracts, in the pause before someone tried to take what wasn't theirs. Her sister was gone. The chair at the head of Skyline Capital would be empty in the morning, and they were already deciding who would sit in it. She didn't look at them again, but she didn't forget their faces. The building smelled the same. Polish. Coffee. Cold air from the vents that always ran a little too high. Samantha paused just inside the revolving doors, her hands still resting on the metal bars that turned behind her. For a second, she thought she might turn back. Not because she couldn't do it, because walking in meant it was real. Susan wasn't upstairs. The lobby screen still carried her image. A black ribbon beside her photo. The company logo dimmed to gray, in remembrance of our visionary leader. Visionary. Samantha looked at the date beneath the photo. 5 days. 5 days since the accident on the research floor. 5 days since the accident on the research floor. 5 days since the official statement. 5 days since she'd signed the temporary executive authorization papers with a pen that didn't feel steady in her hand. The receptionist stood when she saw her. Too quickly. Ms. Prepact. Young. Samantha nodded once. She didn't trust her voice yet. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it ever had. She used to visit for lunch, to argue about nothing, to steal Susan's chair and spin in it while Susan pretended to be annoyed. She could still hear it. The sound of her sister's heels pacing when she was thinking, the quiet hum she made without realizing. The doors opened. 3 men were already waiting outside the executive conference room. Mr. Hale, Mr. Garrison, Mr. Pierce, all wearing expressions that were careful, respectful even, but not soft. "We didn't expect you so soon," Hale said, offering a thin smile. She noticed the word. "Soon. It's been 5 days," Samantha replied. Her voice came out even. That surprised her. Pierce adjusted his glasses. "Of course. We just thought, given everything, perhaps you'd want more time." "Time for what?" "To step aside." "To grieve," Garrison added. She looked at him. Held his gaze a second too long. "I'll do that later." Silence settled between them. It wasn't awkward. It was measuring. Hale opened the conference room door as if he were hosting. She walked past him first. Susan's chair sat at the head of the table, the leather still creased from use. Samantha paused, fingertips brushing the backrest. The room felt colder than the lobby. They took their seats slowly, like men preparing for negotiation rather than condolence. "We've reviewed the preliminary reports from the research division," Pierce began. "The equipment malfunction appears isolated." "Appears." Samantha sat down, not at the head. "Not yet." "Appears," she repeated. Garrison cleared his throat. "The fire suppression system activated late. That's what escalated it." "And the lab logs?" she asked. Hale leaned back slightly. "Corrupted in the incident." "Corrupted." She let the word sit. "So," Hale continued, folding his hands, "given the instability, we believe an interim executive committee would provide stability until the board elects a permanent successor." There it was, neatly packaged. She felt something tighten in her stomach. Not panic, not grief. Recognition. They had already drafted this. "How long," she asked quietly, "did it take you to decide that?" Garrison's jaw shifted. "We're thinking about shareholders. My sister died in that building. And we are honoring her by protecting what she built," Hale replied smoothly. She looked at each of them in turn. 3 votes. 3 men who had once praised Susan in interviews. 3 men who now spoke about stability as if it required removing her name. Samantha stood. The movement surprised them. She could see it, the flicker in Pierce's eyes. She walked to the head of the table and placed her hand on the chair. The bylaws state that as the majority inheritor of Class A shares, I assume executive authority pending formal vote. She didn't sit yet, and I'm calling that vote for 30 days from now. Hale's smile faded. That's irregular. No, she said. It's legal. Silence again. He leaned forward. You don't have operational experience at this level. That one landed closer. She let the breath out slowly through her nose. I have access to every file, Susan did. That isn't the same. No, she agreed. It isn't. She finally sat. And you should be very glad of that. No one spoke for a moment. Pierce gathered his folder. We'll expect a formal agenda by tomorrow morning. You'll have it, she said. They left together. Not rushed. Not defeated. Just postponed. The door clicked shut. The room felt larger without them. Samantha remained seated, staring at the surface of the table. Her reflection looked steadier than she felt. She let herself press her fingers into her eyes, just for a second. The accident report replayed in her head. Equipment failure. Electrical spark. Fire. Susan had called her the night before. I think something's off, she'd said. Not scared, just thoughtful. Off. Samantha swallowed. A soft knock broke the silence. She lowered her hands. Yes. The door opened slightly. A man stepped in, holding a cardboard delivery box, mid-30s. Maybe. Jacket worn at the elbows. Cap in his hands instead of on his head. Delivery for Ms. Young, he said. His voice was steady, low. She frowned. That's me. He walked in carefully, as if unsure whether he belonged there. The box didn't have a company logo. No sender? She asked. He shook his head. Left at the front desk this morning, marked urgent. She stood slowly. Up close, she noticed his eyes. Not tired, not distracted, alert. He placed the box on the table without pushing it toward her. She noticed that too. Sign here, he said, holding out the digital pad. Her hand hovered before taking the stylus. For a second, she hesitated. Not fear, just instinct. What's your name? She asked. He looked at her, measuring something she couldn't see. Luke. Just that. She signed. He gave a small nod. Have a good day, Ms. Young. It wasn't polite. It sounded deliberate. He left quietly. The door shut. She stared at the box. No return address. No markings. The room felt colder again. She reached forward and lifted the lid. Inside, neatly stacked, printed lab reports. Research division. Dates from 2 weeks before the fire. On top, a sticky note. Not typed. Handwritten. Check the power override logs. Her breath caught. Susan's handwriting. She knew it instantly. Not neat. Slightly slanted to the right. Her chest tightened, but she didn't let it rise higher than that. She picked up the first report. Someone had circled the timestamp in red ink. 11:47 p.m. The fire had been reported at 11:52. 5 minutes. Her fingers trembled once before she steadied them against the table. Off. Susan had said something was off. Samantha closed the lid slowly. The room no longer felt like a boardroom. It felt like the edge of something. And she realized with a clarity that didn't leave room for doubt. The accident wasn't an accident, and someone had made sure she knew it. She didn't take the box home. That surprised her later. It would have been easier to read it alone, somewhere quiet, somewhere without glass walls and security cameras, and the low hum of a building that never really slept. But she left it on the table and sat down again, pulling the reports out one by one. Paper felt different from screens. Heavier. Honest. Susan had circled 3 entries in red, not just the timestamp. 3 separate override requests on the main power grid feeding the research floor, all within 10 minutes. Samantha read the technician ID attached to the first override. It belonged to a man who had resigned 2 months ago. The second ID matched a contractor who was out of state the night of the fire. She remembered because Susan had complained about approving his travel expenses. The third field was blank. No ID, just an internal access code. She leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. The board had said the logs were corrupted. Corrupted didn't look like this. This looked edited. She pushed the thought aside. Slow down. Her phone buzzed in her hand. Unknown number. For a moment, she considered ignoring it. Then she answered. Yes. Silence. She almost ended the call. Check the physical server room, a voice said quietly. Not rushed. Not panicked. Luke. She didn't ask how he had her number. The override logs were mirrored locally, he continued. If they wanted to erase something, they would have focused on the central archive. Her grip tightened on the phone. You deliver packages, she said evenly. A pause. Sometimes. The line went dead. She stared at the dark screen. Not fear. Not yet. Just awareness. She gathered the reports back into the box, slid the lid on, and carried it herself down the hall. Assistants glanced up as she passed. Some offered small smiles. Some avoided her eyes. The IT department sat 2 floors below the executive wing. Fluorescent lights. Low ceilings. People who rarely looked up unless something was broken. The server room required dual authentication. Her badge worked. The second lock required a rotating code. She didn't know it. She stood there a second, staring at the keypad. Then she knocked. A young technician opened the door from inside, surprised. Ms. Young, I need access to the local research backups. His eyes flickered. Not at her. At the hallway behind her. We were instructed to restrict. By who? He hesitated. Mr. Stripting. Hale. Her jaw tightened. Override it, she said. He swallowed. I can't without written. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. My sister died because something failed in that lab. I'm not asking you for a favor. The silence between them stretched. Then he moved aside. The air inside the server room was cooler, louder. Racks of blinking lights, steady and indifferent. He led her to a console and logged in with shaking fingers. The mirror backups auto-sync every 6 hours, he explained quietly. If something was removed from Central before the sync, she nodded. Search the time window, she said. 11:30 p.m. to midnight. The screen flickered as files loaded. Rows of data appeared. Her pulse slowed instead of quickening. There. Override request. 11:37 p.m. Local ID field populated. She leaned closer. The internal access code resolved into a name. Victor Dane. Chief Operations Officer. Her stomach dropped, but her face didn't move. Dane had been with Skyline for 15 years. He had stood beside Susan at press conferences. He had given a statement to the media about the tragic malfunction. The technician glanced at her carefully. Should I print this? Yes. Her voice felt distant. The printer whirred. She watched the page slide out. Black ink. Clean. Indisputable. Don't tell anyone I was here, she said. He nodded too quickly. She left without looking back. In the elevator, alone, she finally let herself lean against the wall. Victor Dane, the name repeated in her head. She remembered Susan arguing with him 3 weeks ago. Closed door. Raised voices. When Samantha had asked about it later, Susan had brushed it off. Just strategy disagreements. That wasn't what it had sounded like. The elevator doors opened onto the executive floor again. She walked straight to Dane's office. The assistant outside looked startled. He's in a call. I'll wait. She didn't sit. She stood by the window, staring down at the city 30 floors below. Cars moving. People crossing streets. Ordinary life. The door opened behind her. Samantha. His voice was warm. Familiar. She turned slowly. Victor Dane looked exactly as he always had. Immaculate suit. Silver at his temples. Calm eyes. I was just about to come see you, he said. Were you? He smiled faintly, stepping closer. These transitions are difficult. I want you to know you have my full support. She studied his face. No flicker. No crack. Did you authorize a power override in the research lab the night of the fire? She asked. Direct. He didn't blink. I oversee operational safety. There were voltage irregularities earlier that week. At 11:47 p.m., a slight pause. Yes. And you didn't think to mention that in the incident report? He inhaled slowly. It wasn't relevant. The air in the room felt thinner. 5 minutes before the fire isn't relevant. His expression shifted. Just a fraction. You're implying something serious. I'm asking something serious. He walked to his desk, placing his hands on the surface, grounded. Electrical systems are complex. Overrides happen. Correlation is not causation. She stepped closer. The logs were erased from Central. That made him still. Forensic teams determine data corruption. Local backups say otherwise. Silence. Heavy now. You went into the server room, he said quietly. Yes. His jaw tightened. That was reckless. Why? Because you don't yet understand what you're looking at. She felt heat rise in her chest, but she kept her voice level. Then, help me understand. He held her gaze. For a long moment, neither moved. Then he straightened. There are shareholders involved in that research. External partners. Contracts you haven't reviewed. That doesn't answer my question. It's the only answer you're getting today. There was, not denial. Deflection. She realized something then. Not sudden, but settling. He wasn't afraid of the truth coming out. He was afraid of her controlling when it did. She stepped back. 30 days, she said quietly. For what? For the vote. He watched her carefully. You think you can hold the board? I don't need to hold them. She let the words land. I need to make them hesitate. She turned toward the door. Samantha. She paused but didn't face him. Be careful, he said. It didn't sound like advice. Outside, the hallway felt different, narrower. Her phone buzzed again. Unknown number. She answered without slowing her steps. Yes. You moved quickly, Luke said. How do you know that? A faint exhale on the other end. Because Dane just made 2 calls. Her hand tightened around the phone. To who? One internal, one external. External to where? A pause. Longcrest International. She stopped walking. Longcrest was massive. Global. Untouchable. What does Longcrest have to do with Skyline's research lab, she asked. More than you've been told. Her heart didn't race. It steadied. Who are you? She asked quietly. Silence stretched between them. Then, someone who doesn't want your sister's work buried. The line disconnected. She stood in the center of the hallway, employees moving around her, unaware. Victor Dane. Longcrest. Override logs. Susan's handwriting. This wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper, and for the first time since the funeral, she felt it clearly. Not loss. Direction. The board meeting 3 days later felt staged. Not formally. Not in any way that could be pointed to. But the seats filled too early. Conversations stopped when she entered. Folders were already aligned in front of each chair. Tabs marked. Sections highlighted. They had prepared something. Samantha took her place at the head this time. No hesitation. The leather was still warm from the overhead lights. Victor Dane sat to her right. Hale across from her. Garrison and Pierce to the left. 8 members total. 8 votes. She set a thin stack of papers in front of her. No slides, no dramatic reveal, just copies of the local server logs. Hale began first, voice smooth. Before we move to agenda, I'd like to propose discussion on leadership continuity. Given recent volatility, we'll discuss research operations first, Samantha said, not louder, just firm enough. A small shift in posture around the table. Dane folded his hands. That wasn't on the distributed agenda. It is now. She slid the first copy across the table toward Hale. No explanation. He looked down. His expression didn't change at first. Then it tightened, barely. Pierce leaned over to see. Garrison adjusted his glasses. This is internal backup data, Hale said carefully. Yes. It wasn't part of the official forensic review. No. a silence that felt different from the others, less controlled. She let them read. 5 minutes before the fire. Override authorization. Victor Dane. Electrical systems require constant monitoring, Dane said evenly. This has already been explained. Not fully, she replied. Pierce cleared his throat. Are you suggesting negligence? She looked at him. I'm suggesting incomplete transparency. Hale placed the paper down slowly. Samantha, these are serious implications. So is a fatal lab fire. The word fatal hung in the air longer than she expected. Garrison shifted in his seat. Insurance investigators found no malicious interference. They didn't review local mirror logs. That's because those logs were considered redundant. Redundant doesn't mean irrelevant. Her pulse stayed level. That surprised her. Dane leaned forward slightly. What exactly are you accusing me of? She met his eyes. I'm asking why central records were altered. They were corrupted. Local backups don't corrupt the same way. The room quieted. One of the quieter board members, Ms. Adler, finally spoke. If there's uncertainty, perhaps an independent audit is appropriate. That wasn't part of their script. Hale shot her a glance. Dane's jaw set. An audit would signal instability to investors, he said. Or it would signal accountability, Samantha replied. No one rushed to answer. She felt it, that small, important shift. Hesitation. Not loyalty, not support, but uncertainty. It was enough. I am formally requesting an external forensic review of the research incident, she said. Effective immediately. You don't have unilateral authority to initiate that without majority approval, Hale replied. She slid another document across the table. Emergency Executive Clause, signed by Susan 3 months before her death. In the event of operational fatality tied to experimental research, the acting executive may authorize immediate external investigation pending board review. Susan's signature at the bottom, ink slightly smudged. No one spoke. Dane looked at the page longer than the others. When was this drafted? Pierce asked quietly. 3 months ago, Samantha answered. Why? She didn't break eye contact with Dane. Maybe she already suspected something. The air tightened. Hale exhaled slowly. Very well, the board will not obstruct an audit. Not support, not approve, not obstruct. It was the best she was going to get. The meeting adjourned stiffly. As members filed out, Dane remained seated. So that's how we're doing this, he said. That's how it should have been done the first time. He stood. You're stepping into territory you don't understand. Then I'll learn quickly. His gaze sharpened. You think you're protecting her legacy. I am. He shook his head once, not mocking, almost tired. You're exposing more than you realize. Then maybe it shouldn't have been hidden. She held his stare. He was the first to look away. Outside, the afternoon light felt harsh. Reporters waited near the entrance now. Not many, just enough. Questions about leadership, about market stability, none about the fire. That part had already faded from headlines. She walked past them without speaking. Her car was parked across the street. She reached for the door handle, Ms. Young. She turned. Luke stood a few steps away. No delivery box this time. No cap, plain jacket, hands in pockets. He looked almost out of place in daylight. You're not supposed to be here, she said quietly. Neither are the men watching you. Her spine stiffened. Where? He didn't turn his head. Black sedan, tinted windows, 2 cars down. She resisted the urge to look. Board security? She asked. No. His voice was certain. A small pause passed between them. Then, do you trust me enough to get in the car and drive somewhere else first? He asked. It wasn't dramatic. Just direct. She studied him. There was something steady about him. Not charming, not forceful. Present. You said Longcrest was involved, she said. Yes. That's a global holding corporation. Yes. And you just happen to know they received a call from my COO. Yes. The smallest flicker of something passed across his face. Not guilt. Wait. Who are you? She asked again. He held her gaze this time. Not who you think. That almost made her smile. Almost. The black sedan's engine started. She heard it without looking, a decision formed before she finished thinking it through. She unlocked her car. Get in. He moved around to the passenger side without hesitation. She drove. Not fast. Not slow. 2 blocks down, she turned unexpectedly into an underground parking structure. The sedan continued straight. She exhaled once. Talk, she said. He didn't immediately. He looked out the windshield a moment as if ordering his thoughts. 6 years ago, he began quietly. Longcrest funded a joint research initiative with Skyline. Medical energy stabilization, high-yield, low-loss transfer systems. She remembered that. Vaguely. Early phase. Classified, it ended abruptly, he continued. Publicly, due to safety concerns. And privately. He looked at her. Because the data didn't match the public explanation. Her grip tightened on the steering wheel. You're saying there was another incident? There was a sabotage. The word landed heavy. No one died, he added, but 2 researchers disappeared from the project within a week. Disappeared. Your sister reopened that research 18 months ago. Her heart skipped. She never told the board. She didn't trust them. Silence filled the car. You work for Longcrest, she said finally. A pause. Yes. Doing what? Investigating why the original project was buried. She stared at him. You're a delivery driver, for now. The answer wasn't offensive. It was simple. She felt a strange sensation then. Not fear, not relief. Alignment. Pieces that had been scattered beginning to tilt toward each other. And my sister, she said slowly. What did she find? She believed the sabotage 6 years ago was internal. Internal to Skyline? Yes. And you think the fire was connected? I think someone panicked when she got close. The concrete ceiling above them felt lower. So you married into this investigation? She asked, studying him carefully. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. I didn't marry anyone. Not yet. The words left her mouth before she examined them. He watched her closely. There it was. The first moment, neither of them pretended this was ordinary. My daughter, he said quietly after a moment. She's 8. That wasn't the answer she expected. I don't bring her near anything uncertain. She didn't know why that mattered. But it did. The parking garage echoed with distant tires. You're asking me to believe you, she said. I'm asking you to verify me. How? Meet me tomorrow. I'll show you what your sister found. She studied him for a long moment. Where? He gave her an address. Not corporate. Residential. She memorized it. He opened the door. Why help me? She asked, before he stepped out. He paused. Because I don't think she died by accident. He closed the door. She sat there alone for a while after he left, hands still on the steering wheel. Victor Dane. Longcrest. Sabotage. 6 years ago, the shape of it wasn't clear yet. But it was no longer random, and somewhere between the boardroom and the parking garage, something inside her had shifted. She wasn't just defending a company anymore. She was stepping into a fight her sister had already started. She didn't tell anyone where she was going the next morning. Not her assistant. Not legal. Not security. She left the house before sunrise. The sky still a dull gray that made the streets look unfinished. For a moment she stood beside her car and just listened. Distant traffic. A dog barking somewhere down the block. Ordinary sounds. She wondered when ordinary stopped meaning safe. The address Luke had given her led to a quiet residential neighborhood across the river. Older houses. Narrow driveways. Lawns that weren't manicured but cared for. Not what she expected. She parked half a block away and walked. The house was modest, white paint slightly weathered, a small porch with 2 chairs. One of them had a child's jacket draped over the back. She noticed that first. The door opened before she knocked. Luke stood there in a plain, dark sweater. No cap. No delivery jacket. "You came," he said. She didn't answer that. He stepped aside. The house smelled like coffee and something sweet. Maybe toast. There were shoes by the door, a pink backpack leaning against the wall. Normal. Too normal. "This isn't what I pictured," she said quietly. He almost smiled. "What did you picture?" "I don't know." That was true. A small voice floated from somewhere deeper in the house. "Dad?" Luke's expression changed immediately. Softer. He glanced over his shoulder. "In here," he called. Footsteps padded across hardwood. A little girl appeared in the hallway, dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail, oversized sweater slipping off one shoulder. She looked at Samantha without fear, just curiosity. "This is Mia," Luke said. Mia studied her seriously. "You're the lady from the building," she said. Samantha blinked. "You've seen me. She waits in the car sometimes," Mia replied, looking at her father. Luke didn't react. Samantha felt something click into place. "You've been watching The Office," she said. "Yes." "For how long?" "Since the funeral." The honesty unsettled her more than if he had denied it. Mia stepped closer. "Are you sad?" The question was simple. Not invasive, just direct. Samantha crouched slightly so they were eye level. "Yes," she said. Mia nodded once, as if that confirmed something. "My mom died when I was little," Mia said matter-of-factly. "Dad doesn't like when people lie about sad things." Luke's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Samantha stood back up. "I don't lie about sad things," she said quietly. Mia seemed satisfied. She disappeared back down the hallway without another word. Silence settled in her place. "She doesn't ask easy questions," Luke said. "No." He gestured toward the kitchen table. Papers were already spread out. Not copies. Original documents. Susan's handwriting again. Notes and margins. Fragments of calculations. A printed email chain with sections highlighted. Samantha stepped closer slowly. "You got these from her office?" she asked. "No." "Then where?" "Private storage." She looked at him sharply. She trusted someone, he said. "Not on the board." The realization moved through her slowly. She knew she was being watched. "Yes." Samantha picked up one of the emails. It referenced an external supplier linked to Longcrest's original research initiative. The subject line was simple: Power Redistribution Anomaly. Her eyes moved down the thread. Victor Dane's name appeared twice. Once 6 years ago. Once 2 months ago. 2 separate projects. Same supplier. Same anomaly. Why would Dane stay involved if he knew the original project collapsed under suspicion? She asked. "Because it didn't collapse," Luke said. She looked up. "It was absorbed," he continued, "shifted under subsidiary layers. Funding rerouted. Oversight diluted. For what purpose? That's what your sister was close to proving." The kitchen felt smaller now. "She thought the sabotage wasn't about stopping the research," Luke said. "It was about controlling it." Samantha set the paper down carefully. "Controlling what?" "Energy stabilization at scale." She frowned slightly. "That's infrastructure-level technology." "Yes." "It would change more than medicine." "Yes." She exhaled slowly. "So someone buried it and revived it quietly." Her mind moved back to the fire. If Susan reopened it without their approval, they would have needed to know how far she'd gotten. And if she got too far. Luke didn't finish that sentence. He didn't need to. Samantha walked to the window. The street outside looked harmless. A neighbor watering plants. A car driving past slowly. It felt distant. "You said Longcrest is investigating," she said. "Why would they expose their own subsidiary network?" "They wouldn't." She turned. "I would." The way he said it made her look at him differently. Not a delivery driver, not just an investigator. "You're not mid-level," she said quietly. "No." "How high?" He held her gaze. "High enough that I don't need permission to ask questions." The room went very still. She studied his face again, but now she saw the control in it, the restraint, the way he measured every word. "You're connected to Longcrest's executive leadership," she said. "Yes." Directly. "Yes." A slow understanding settled over her. "And you married—" "I didn't marry anyone," he said again, but this time his voice was firmer. "Not yet," she repeated. He didn't look away. The idea had been forming in the back of her mind since the parking garage. Board members circling, external pressure, surveillance. "If I align publicly with Longcrest," she said carefully. The board hesitates. "Yes." They won't know whether the investigation is internal or external. "Yes." And if someone is trying to control the research through layered subsidiaries, a visible alliance disrupts that. He didn't answer immediately. "You're thinking strategically," he said. "I'm thinking defensively." He nodded once. There was a long pause. "Then my daughter's safety is not negotiable," he said quietly. She met his eyes. "Neither is my sister's." The weight of that sat between them. Not romantic, not dramatic, just real. "This would have to look legitimate," she said. "It would. Public. Yes. Messy. Probably." She thought about the board, about Victor Dane's warning. "Be careful." She thought about Mia's blunt question. "Are you sad?" "Yes," she said finally. "I am." Luke watched her carefully. "You understand what this invites," he said. "Yes." "Pressure." "Yes." "Scrutiny." "I already have that." A faint nod. "This buys us time," she continued. "And leverage. It also paints a target. It already exists." Silence again. Then he stepped back slightly. "If we do this," he said, "it's not a performance." She didn't misunderstand what he meant. "No," she said. "It isn't." Outside, a car door slammed somewhere down the street. Ordinary noise. She felt the direction inside her solidify. Not reckless, not impulsive. Deliberate. "I'll announce an engagement," she said. "Effective immediately." His expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes. "You move fast," he said. "They tried to bury her work," she replied. "I don't intend to move slowly." Mia's voice floated from the hallway again. "Dad, can I bring my tablet?" Luke glanced toward the sound, then back at Samantha. "This affects her too," he said. "I know." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once. Not agreement. Commitment. Samantha stepped toward the door. "I'll have my legal team draft something vague," she said. "Private ceremony. Minimal detail. That won't stop questions. I don't need to stop them." She opened the door. The morning light was brighter now. Before stepping out, she turned back slightly. "If this goes wrong," she said quietly, "it won't just cost the company." "I know," he said. She believed him. As she walked back toward her car, she felt something she hadn't allowed herself since the funeral. Not hope, not relief, but structure. The chaos had edges now, and inside those edges she could move. By noon, financial news outlets would carry the headline. Skyline Capital heiress announces sudden engagement. Speculation would follow. The board would react. Victor Dane would call someone. And somewhere inside that reaction, something would slip. She just had to be ready when it did. The announcement went out at 11:40 a.m. Short. Controlled. No photos. Skyline Capital confirms that CEO Samantha Young is privately engaged. The couple requests discretion during this time. That was all. By noon, the stock dipped 2 points. By 1, it recovered 3. By 2, Victor Dane requested an emergency executive session. She expected that. What she didn't expect was the way the hallway quieted when she stepped out of her office. Not gossip, not excitement. Assessment. Assistants paused mid-sentence. Analysts pretended to scroll through screens they weren't reading. The story had shifted. She wasn't the grieving twin anymore. She was a variable. Inside the boardroom, Dane stood near the window, phone in hand. "You move quickly," he said without greeting. "You've mentioned that before." Hale and the others filed in behind her. No one commented on the engagement directly. That interested her more than if they had. Dane placed a folder on the table. Longcrest International acquired a minority stake in Skyline 6 years ago through layered investment vehicles, he began. Her pulse didn't change. I'm aware. Are you aware, he continued evenly, that your fiancé is connected to them? There it was. Not a question. A test. She kept her expression still. My personal life isn't subject to board interrogation. When it intersects with controlling interests, it is. Pierce shifted uncomfortably. Hale spoke more carefully. We simply need clarity. Clarity. She almost admired the word choice. What specifically are you asking? She said. Is this engagement strategic? Dane asked. Yes. The room went still. No hesitation, no apology. She saw it land. Hale leaned back slowly. Strategic in what sense? In the sense that Skyline's research will not be quietly absorbed into external entities without oversight. Silence. So heavy it felt physical. You're implying hostile intent, Dane said. I'm implying vigilance. He held her gaze. And if Longcrest intends to consolidate control, then they'll have to do it in the open. The air shifted. Not explosive, but altered. Ms. Adler spoke softly. Are we in danger of a takeover? Samantha looked at her. We're in danger of losing something we don't fully understand. That's not reassuring, Pierce muttered. It isn't meant to be. Dane's expression hardened. You're escalating corporate tension based on incomplete data. I'm responding to a lab fire, erased logs, and layered subsidiaries tied to discontinued research. She let each piece fall separately. He didn't deny it. That mattered. What exactly do you think the research leads to? Hale asked quietly. She studied him. I think it leads to something people are willing to bury. No one laughed. The meeting stretched longer than usual. Questions circled. Legal exposure. Investor reaction. Media optics. She answered carefully. Not everything, just enough. When it finally adjourned, Dane lingered again. You're forcing hands, he said once they were alone. Maybe they need forcing. You don't know whose. She stood. Neither do you. For the first time, something like irritation flashed across his face. You think this is about money. I think it's about control. He didn't argue. That silence told her more than words. That evening, she didn't go home. She went to the research floor. It had been sealed after the fire. Officially under review, security recognized her and unlocked the access door without question. The air inside still carried a faint metallic scent. Burn marks traced up one wall, dark and uneven. The central workstation had been cleared, but the outline of equipment remained like a shadow. She walked slowly, not touching anything at first. She could almost see Susan standing there, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back loosely, focused, obsessed sometimes. On the far side of the room, a secondary power unit sat partially dismantled. She crouched beside it. The casing showed signs of manual adjustment, not explosion damage. Intentional rewiring. Her breath slowed. Footsteps echoed behind her. She didn't startle. You shouldn't be here alone, Luke said. She stood. You followed me. Yes. He didn't pretend otherwise. She gestured toward the unit. This was opened before the fire. He knelt beside it, examining the panel. Not rushed, he murmured. Careful work. Can you tell when? Not precisely. He traced a wire lightly with his fingertip. This wasn't meant to fail immediately. Her chest tightened slightly. Then what? He was meant to redirect load. Redirect to where? He looked up at her. That's the question. They stood in silence for a moment. The lab felt less like a crime scene now, more like a message. Dan authorized the override, she said quietly. Yes. But this wiring predates that moment. Yes. So the override triggered something that was already altered. He nodded once. Which means the fire wasn't spontaneous, she said. No. The words settled heavily. Not dramatic, just final. She walked toward the center of the room. If Susan knew, she said slowly, she wouldn't have stayed late alone. No, unless she was close. Luke watched her carefully. Close enough to prove it, he said. She exhaled through her nose. The silence stretched. Then, a faint sound, metal shifting. Both of them froze. It came again, soft. From the far storage area, Luke moved first. Not fast, deliberate. He stepped between her and the sound. She didn't argue. The storage door stood slightly ajar. It hadn't been when she walked in. Luke reached for the handle slowly, pulled it open. Empty shelves, boxes, and a small blinking device attached beneath the lower rack. Her stomach dropped. Tracker, he said quietly, or listening. He crouched carefully, examining it without touching. Recently placed. She felt her pulse begin to rise now. Not panic. Awareness. They know we're here, she said. Yes. Footsteps echoed faintly from the hallway outside the lab. More than one. Luke stood. Time to leave. She didn't hesitate. They moved toward the exit just as two security personnel stepped through the doorway. Ms. Young, one of them said, slightly breathless. We were informed you entered the sealed floor. Informed by who? She asked evenly. They glanced at each other. Executive Operations. Victor. Luke stood slightly behind her, quiet. This floor remains under review, the guard continued. I authorize my own access, she replied. He hesitated. Please coordinate future visits through operations. I'll coordinate through legal. She held his gaze until he looked away. They left without further argument. But the message was clear. They were being watched. Outside the building, night had fully settled. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement. She stopped beside her car. They're accelerating, she said. Yes, the tracker. It means they didn't expect you to move this fast. She looked up at the skyline. Lights in office towers flickered like distant signals. If they're monitoring the lab, she said, they're monitoring internal communications. Yes. So we stop using them. He studied her. You're adjusting quickly. I don't have a choice. A quiet pause. This gets more dangerous from here, he said. I know. He didn't soften it. Didn't reassure her. That steadiness grounded her more than comfort would have. She unlocked her car. Tomorrow, she said, we push the audit forward. He nodded. And the engagement, he added. Yes. She looked at him across the roof of the car. It still felt unreal in some ways. Not romantic, strategic, necessary. But beneath that, something quieter. Trust forming in uneven lines. If they wanted to scare me, she said softly, they should have done it earlier. He watched her for a long moment. They're not trying to scare you, he said. They're trying to measure you. She held his gaze, then let them. The photo surfaced the next morning, blurry, taken from across the street. Her stepping out of Luke's car. Him walking around to meet her on the sidewalk. Close enough to look familiar, not close enough to look intimate. The headline didn't accuse, it suggested. Who is Samantha Young's mysterious fiancé? By 10, 3 financial blogs that traced Luke to a delivery subcontractor license, registered under a shell company. By 11, Hale requested another closed-door session. She didn't rush, let them sit. When she entered, the tone had shifted. Not openly hostile, just sharper. Pierce held up a printed copy of the article. Care to clarify? Clarify what? His background? He works logistics? That's not what this says. She sat down slowly. Then perhaps it's incomplete. Dane watched her more than the others, measuring, waiting. Longcrest's name is surfacing, Hale said carefully. You understand the implications? Yes. Are you coordinating with them? She let the silence stretch just long enough to make them uncomfortable. I'm coordinating with whoever values transparency. That's not an answer. It's the only one you're getting today. A muscle ticked in Pierce's jaw. We cannot have external entities influencing internal investigations. You already do, she replied evenly. The room stilled. Dane spoke, voice controlled. You're destabilizing confidence. No, she said quietly. The fire did that. He held her gaze. If this is about personal loyalty, it's about patterns, she cut in. She slid another document across the table. Supplier records. Energy component shipments tied to the discontinued project 6 years ago. Reactivated 3 months ago. Same routing codes, same subcontractors, different subsidiaries. Hale's fingers tightened on the page. Where did you get this? It was in our own archives, not in the executive summary. That's the point. Dane didn't look at the paper this time. He looked at her. You think this proves sabotage? I think it proves continuity. The word hung there. Continuity meant planning. Planning meant intent. Even if that's true, Pierce said. Quieter now. What's your end game? She met his eyes. Finish the research. A few of them blinked. Hale leaned back. You can't be serious. It was my sister's life's work. It's volatile. It's powerful. Exactly. The boardroom felt smaller. Dane's voice lowered slightly. Reviving that project invites scrutiny from sectors you're not prepared to handle. Then I'll prepare. You don't know who benefits from it staying buried. No, she agreed softly. I don't. That admission shifted something. Not weakness, honesty. And that, she continued, is precisely why it won't stay buried. Silence. Not because they were convinced, because they were recalculating. That evening, she didn't go straight home again. Instead, she drove to a quiet park near the river where she used to meet Susan on weekends. It was colder than usual, wind cutting across the water. Luke was already there. Mia beside him on a bench, swinging her legs. Samantha approached slowly. Mia looked up first. Are we famous now? She asked. Samantha paused, not in a fun way. Mia nodded seriously as if she understood the difference. Luke stood. The media cycle's accelerating, he said. Yes. Longcrest board called this morning. She studied him. And they don't like surprises. I'm not their employee. A faint flicker at the corner of his mouth. No, he said. You're not. They walked a few steps away from Mia, though still close enough to hear her humming. They'll try to distance themselves publicly, he continued. Deny coordination. Let them. That may isolate you. I'm already isolated. The wind picked up. He watched her carefully. You look tired. I'm not. That wasn't entirely true. She felt the strain in her shoulders, the quiet tension in her jaw. But tired wasn't the word. She was alert. More than she had been in weeks. They placed a tracker in the lab, she said. His eyes hardened slightly. I assumed. They're not hiding it anymore. No. A pause. My security team can't be trusted fully, she added. I know. You've been vetting them. Yes. The honesty didn't shock her anymore. 2 are clean, he said. 1 reports directly to operations. Victor. Yes. She watched Mia drawing shapes in the dirt with her shoe. This stops being corporate soon, she said quietly. It already is. A long silence passed between them. The river moved steadily, indifferent. What happens when the audit confirms manipulation? She asked. It won't name a mastermind immediately, he said, but it will expose structural interference. And then, pressure builds. On who? Whoever's coordinating across subsidiaries. She looked at him carefully, and if that leads to Longcrest itself. He didn't answer right away. Then I step into a conflict I've been avoiding. That told her enough. You're not just investigating, she said softly. No. You're preparing. Yes. For what? For removal. The word sat heavily between them. She felt something tighten in her chest, not fear for herself. For him. For how long, she asked. Long enough. Mia looked up suddenly. Dad, are we moving? The question cut through the air. Luke glanced at her. No. Mia frowned slightly. Last time people got mad at you, we moved. Samantha felt the words more than heard them. Luke crouched beside his daughter. We're not moving, he said gently. Mia searched his face, then nodded slowly, satisfied for now. When he stood again, Samantha didn't speak immediately. Your life is already unstable, she said finally. It's been unstable for years. And you're adding this. Yes, because of the research. Yes, and because of me. He met her eyes. Yes. The wind carried a sharper chill. She hadn't expected that answer to feel heavy, but it did. This can't just be strategic, he said quietly. If we're going to make it public. She understood what he meant. Public alliances had consequences, not just in headlines, in proximity, in routine, in trust. I don't make decisions lightly, she said. I know. Then trust that. He studied her for a long moment. I do. Mia ran toward them suddenly. Can we get ice cream? Luke hesitated. Samantha surprised herself. Yes, she said. Mia beamed. They walked toward a small shop at the edge of the park. Inside, fluorescent lights buzzed softly. A teenager behind the counter barely glanced up. Ordinary. Simple. Mia chose strawberry. Luke paid in cash. Samantha watched them from a few steps away. This wasn't what she had imagined when she walked into Skyline 5 days after the funeral. Not board fights, not trackers, not engagement announcements, and certainly not standing in a small ice cream shop trying to memorize the sound of a child laughing. Mia handed her a spoon without asking. Samantha took it. Cold sweetness hit her tongue. For a second, the noise in her head quieted. Outside, a car idled longer than necessary. She noticed it without turning her head. Luke noticed too. Their eyes met briefly. No panic, just acknowledgement. The shape of the conflict was clearer now. Not random, not chaotic. Deliberate. And as Mia talked about school projects and a friend who cheated on a spelling test, Samantha realized something small but undeniable. This wasn't just about exposing corruption anymore. It was about protecting something that hadn't existed a week ago. A fragile structure. Unlikely. But real. And once she felt that, once it settled in her chest alongside grief and anger and resolve, there was no stepping back. The audit firm arrived without announcement. No press. No internal memo. 2 senior forensic analysts and a legal observer with a face that didn't give anything away. They set up in a sealed conference room and requested full system access within the hour. Victor Dane didn't argue. That bothered her more than if he had. By midday, the atmosphere inside Skyline shifted again. Conversations dropped when auditors passed. IT staff moved faster than usual. Doors stayed closed longer. Samantha worked from her office, but kept the door open. Visibility mattered. At 3:17 p.m., her secure line rang. Not the main desk phone, the secondary one Susan used for external counsel. She answered without speaking. They're moving funds. Luke's voice. Where? Out of a shell subsidiary tied to the original research. Her fingers stilled over the keyboard. How much? Enough to clean the trail. Her jaw tightened. Can you intercept, not without exposing my position? A pause. Let them move it, she said. Silence on the line. You're sure? Yes. Why? Because money that runs leaves tracks. Another pause. You're learning. I don't have time not to. She ended the call and immediately dialed legal. Freeze discretionary transfers from internal research accounts pending audit review. That requires dual authorization, counsel replied carefully. You have mine. And operations. Send it to the board. Within 10 minutes, Hale was at her door. You're escalating again. They're liquidating. Based on what evidence? She held his gaze. Instinct? He exhaled sharply. Instinct doesn't hold up in court. No, she agreed, but patterns do. He stepped inside, lowering his voice. If this becomes a public financial dispute, stock volatility won't be our biggest problem. What will? Regulatory attention. Good. He stared at her. You don't mean that? I do. A long silence. He studied her as if trying to determine whether she was reckless or resolved. Victor says you're being influenced, he said finally. By who? He didn't answer directly. That engagement is not your concern. It is if it destabilizes governance. Governance was destabilized the night my sister died. The words came out sharper than she intended. Hale didn't flinch. You think Victor orchestrated that? I think he authorized something he hasn't explained, and if there's someone above him, then we'll find them. He shook his head slowly. You don't know how deep corporate alliances go. No, she said quietly, but I know what silence looks like. He left without another word. By evening, the auditors requested a private meeting, not with the board, with her. They laid out preliminary findings carefully. Power override logs had been manually adjusted post-incident, not corrupted. Adjusted. Authorization timestamps altered by someone with senior credentials. Her pulse remained steady. Can you attribute the alteration? She asked. Not conclusively yet. But the credentials required exceed mid-level operations, meaning executive clearance. She nodded once. And the funding movement. They exchanged a look. We flagged irregular transfers tied to dormant R&D structures, initiated within 48 hours of your engagement announcement. That detail mattered. They're reacting, she murmured. Yes. Can you freeze it? Legally, yes. Practically, they may reroute. Let them reroute, she said again. The auditors looked at her carefully. You're not trying to prevent it. No. You're documenting it. Yes. A small nod from one of them. Understood. When they left, she allowed herself one slow breath. The lines were tightening. Not around her, around someone else. She didn't see Victor leave that night, but she saw the black sedan again. Different driver, same tinted windows. This time it didn't idle, it followed. Not aggressively, just close enough. She didn't call Luke immediately. She drove 3 blocks. Turned unexpectedly. The sedan followed. Her hand stayed steady on the wheel. At a red light, she checked the rearview mirror. 2 silhouettes in the front seats, watching. The light turned green. She didn't accelerate. Let them sit there with her. Then, a sharp honk behind them. The sedan shifted lanes abruptly and sped forward, disappearing into traffic. She didn't chase. She memorized the plate instead. When she finally called Luke, her voice was even. They're done measuring. Yes, he said quietly. They're pushing. Yes. A pause. You need protection beyond corporate security, he added. I won't hide. Protection isn't hiding. Silence. My daughter's school received a verification call today, he said. Her stomach tightened. From who? Claiming to be from Skyline HR. She closed her eyes briefly. Their widening pressure. Yes. This wasn't about stock anymore. It wasn't about board votes. It was personal. I can relocate her temporarily, he said. No. The word came out immediate. He didn't argue. You're certain? Yes. Why? Because if we run now, they win. A long silence. Running isn't losing, he said quietly. It is when it becomes habit. He didn't respond to that. She softened her tone slightly. We increase visibility, she said. Public appearances, transparency, make it harder for them to move quietly. That puts you closer to exposure. I already am. Another pause. You're not afraid, he said. She considered that. I am, she admitted. For yourself. No. He understood. They didn't say Mia's name. They didn't need to. The next morning, she scheduled a press briefing. Not large. Selective. Controlled questions. She stood at the podium with cameras aimed at her face. The independent audit into Skyline's research division is progressing, she said calmly. Preliminary findings indicate procedural inconsistencies that require accountability. Reporters leaned forward. Are you accusing executive leadership? One asked. I'm prioritizing transparency. Does this involve your fiancé's corporate ties? My engagement is personal. Flashbulbs flickered. Is Skyline at risk of acquisition? Skyline is at risk of silence. That ends now. The statement traveled faster than she expected. By afternoon, financial markets reacted. Not catastrophic, but noticeable. Victor called within the hour. "You've crossed a line," he said without greeting. "No," she replied evenly. "I've drawn one. You're forcing exposure that affects more than Skyline. Then perhaps those affected should have considered that. You don't know who you're confronting. Neither did my sister." Silence, then his voice dropped lower. "Be careful who you trust." The call ended. She stared at the phone for a moment, not shaken, just aware. The warning felt less like threat now, more like desperation. That evening, she went to Luke's house without calling first. Mia opened the door. "Did you win?" she asked. Samantha crouched slightly. "Not yet." Mia considered that. "Okay." Inside, Luke watched her carefully. "You escalated publicly," he said. "Yes, they'll accelerate in response." "I know." He stepped closer. "This may move beyond financial leverage." "It already has." She didn't need to explain. "The school call, the sedan, the tracker." He nodded once. "I have contingencies." "So do I." They stood in silence for a moment. Not dramatic, just steady. "You can still step back," he said quietly. "No." "You're certain?" "Yes." He searched her face for doubt. He didn't find it. Outside, a car passed slowly down the street. Both of them noticed. Neither moved toward the window. This wasn't a boardroom anymore. It wasn't even corporate war. It was pressure applied from multiple directions. Calculated, coordinated, and somewhere inside that tightening circle she felt something unexpected. Clarity. They weren't just reacting now. They were drawing someone out. And whoever that was beginning to feel it. The break didn't come from the auditors. It came from accounting. Late. After most of the building had emptied, a junior analyst who normally wouldn't have walked past the executive floor without a reason knocked on her open door with both hands full of printed spreadsheets. He looked pale. "I wasn't sure who to send this to," he said. "Send what? These transfers?" He laid the papers down carefully, like they might burn him. "Research reallocation requests," he continued. "Approved retroactively. Backdated." She stepped closer. The approval signature line read, "Acting CEO authorization." Her name. Dated 2 days before the fire. Her stomach tightened. "I never signed this." "I know," he said quickly. "The digital key matches your executive credential, but the access point traces to a remote terminal." She scanned the routing data. A remote login executed from within the building. After hours. "Who has access to mirror executive credentials?" she asked quietly. He swallowed. "Chief Operations. Victor." The pattern was tightening. "Why bring this to me?" she asked. He hesitated. "My brother works in the research wing," he said. "He was there that night, alive. But close enough." She nodded once. "You did the right thing." His relief was visible. When he left, she locked the door behind him. Then she called Luke. "They forged my authorization," she said without preamble. A pause. "That escalates." "Yes. Send me the routing data." She photographed the pages and transmitted them through the secure channel he had set up days earlier. Silence while he reviewed. "They're building narrative insulation," he said finally. "For what?" "For blame." Her jaw tightened. "They're preparing to assign negligence." "Yes." "To me." "Yes." The word didn't surprise her. It angered her. Not loudly. Cold. "They're not just burying the research," she said quietly. "They're burying the accountability and creating a fallback target." Silence. "You." She felt the weight of it settle in her chest. Not panic. Calculation. "How long until the audit exposes the credential misuse?" she asked. 48 hours, maybe less. "Then they'll move before that." "Yes." Then they'll move before that. Yes. A long pause. Where's Mia? She asked. At home. Keep her there. I was planning to. I'm coming over. No, he said immediately. She stopped. Why? Because if they're escalating legally, your proximity to us becomes leverage. She didn't like that answer, but she understood it. I won't disappear, she said. I'm not asking you to. Then what? Meet somewhere neutral. She exhaled slowly. Fine. They chose a quiet hotel lounge near the financial district. Neutral ground. Cameras. Public enough to deter aggression. She arrived first, sat where she could see both entrances. 10 minutes later, Luke walked in alone. No Mia. She felt the absence. He sat across from her without speaking at first. Longcrest's internal audit mirrored Skyline's, he said quietly. Same supplier chains, same rerouted funding, and a name surfaced above Victor. Her pulse steadied. Who? Board-level partner, not Skyline. Longcrest. He nodded once. The air felt thinner. You're saying this reaches your own board? Yes. And you're still sitting here? Yes. A faint flicker of something passed between them. Not fear. Recognition. This isn't rogue operations, she said slowly. It's coordinated. Yes. Across corporations. Yes. Silence stretched. The hum of quiet conversation around them felt distant. If your board is implicated, she said carefully, this stops being internal. It already has. And if you expose it, I lose my position. The words weren't dramatic. They were factual. And if you don't, my daughter grows up watching me stay silent. That landed heavier than anything else. She studied him. You didn't step into this because of Skyline, she said softly. No, you stepped into it years ago. Yes, and Susan's death forced your timeline. Yes, a server approached the table. They both ordered coffee they wouldn't drink. When the server left, she leaned slightly forward. They're preparing to frame me, she said. I know. They forged my credentials. I saw. If they push it publicly before the audit clears it, it creates doubt. Exactly. Silence again. Not uncertain. Just heavy. We move first, she said. Yes. Expose the forgery. Yes. And the layered funding. Yes. That implicates Victor. And above him. She held his gaze. Your board. Yes. The quiet between them felt like the edge of something irreversible. This won't stay corporate, she said. No. It becomes criminal. Yes. And dangerous. Yes. He didn't soften that. She appreciated that. A long pause. Then she said it. If this costs you, Longcrest, it might. And us. He didn't look away. It won't. The certainty in that answer wasn't loud. It was steady. She felt something shift in her chest. Not strategy, not calculation. Something simpler. Trust. They scheduled the joint disclosure for 48 hours later. Simultaneous release. Skyline's audit findings. Longcrest's internal compliance review. Coordinated. Unavoidable. The night before, she barely slept. Not from fear, from awareness. This was the moment the structure either held or collapsed. At 6:12 a.m., her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Silence. Then you're making a mistake, Victor's voice said quietly. She didn't speak. You don't understand the scale of what you're stepping into. I understand enough. You think exposing me fixes this. I think exposing truth does. A pause. You'll destroy value. Value built on what? Silence. You could have run Skyline quietly, he continued. Prospered. At what cost? Another pause. You're not your sister, he said finally. No, she agreed softly. I'm not. The line disconnected. She stood in her kitchen, phone still in her hand. The sun was just beginning to rise, light spreading slowly across the floor. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt calm. Later that morning, the disclosures went live. Audit confirmation of executive credential misuse. Evidence of post-incident log manipulation. Layered subsidiary funding tied to suppressed research. Longcrest's compliance board announcing internal investigation into a senior partner. Victor Dane's resignation followed within 2 hours, publicly citing personal reasons. The markets reacted violently. Skyline stock dropped 12% before stabilizing. Longcrest's dipped 6%. Media cycles exploded. Questions multiplied. But one thing was undeniable. The silence had broken. That evening, she went to Luke's house again. This time, no car lingered down the street. No slow passes. Just quiet. Mia opened the door with a wide grin. "Dad said you won today." Samantha crouched slightly. "It's not over." Mia nodded thoughtfully. "But you didn't lose." Samantha let that sit. "No," she said softly. "Not today." Inside, Luke watched her. Victor's resignation had already begun rippling through corporate circles. But the name above him hadn't surfaced yet. It would. Soon, she stepped closer to him. "This changes things," she said. "Yes. For you. Yes. For you. Yes. For us." A pause. "Yes." Silence settled. Not uncertain. Not fragile. Just real. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "Now," he said. "They push back." She held his gaze. "Let them." And for the first time since the funeral, she realized something had shifted inside her. The grief was still there. Heavy. Constant. But it no longer blurred her vision. It sharpened it. This wasn't about reclaiming control of a company anymore. It was about choosing what kind of future survived the truth. And she had already chosen. The name surfaced on a Tuesday, not through Skyline, not through Longcrest, through a regulatory filing in Singapore that most people would have ignored if a junior financial reporter hadn't been chasing the ripple from Victor's resignation. Arthur Lennox. Senior partner. Longcrest International. Oversight authority on cross-border energy investments, including the original joint research initiative with Skyline. Luke didn't say anything when the article broke. He just stood in the kitchen, phone in his hand, reading the same paragraph twice. Samantha watched his face instead of the screen. "You knew," she said quietly. "I suspected. And now." He set the phone down slowly. "Now it's public." Arthur Lennox wasn't reckless. He didn't issue denials. He issued statements about governance stability and procedural review. Calm, polished, untouchable. But the documents attached to the filing told a quieter story. Authorization pathways, private oversight committees, strategic risk mitigation. Mitigation. Samantha thought about the lab, about Susan staying late, about red ink circling a timestamp. Was he the one who buried it 6 years ago, she asked. Yes. And when Susan reopened it, he noticed. A long silence. Mia's voice drifted from the living room, humming while she worked on homework. Normal. Ordinary. Luke ran a hand over his face. If Lennox goes down, he said quietly, he won't go quietly. Meaning, he'll protect himself. At what cost? He looked at her. At any cost. She felt that settle in her chest. Not fear, preparation. By afternoon, Skyline's legal team had already begun coordinating with federal investigators, cross-border financial interference, corporate fraud, evidence tampering. It was no longer contained. The boardroom felt different now. Hale didn't posture. Pierce didn't challenge. They listened. Arthur Lennox's name shifted the gravity. Victor had been operational. Lennox was architectural. You're aware this may implicate Longcrest entirely, Hale said carefully. Yes. And your fiancé? Yes. Silence. No one said the rest out loud. Conflict of interest. Divided loyalty. She stood at the head of the table. I am not protecting a corporation, she said calmly. I am protecting this company's right to operate without coercion. No one argued, because now they understood the scale. The retaliation didn't come through media, it came through threat. Subtle. Calculated. Luke's car was followed again. This time, closer. Mia's school received a second call, not asking questions, just confirming address details. The message wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. That night, Luke stood by the window longer than usual. "She stays home tomorrow," he said. Samantha nodded. Yes. They didn't argue about it. There was no pride left in that decision, only priority. Later, when Mia was asleep, they sat across from each other at the kitchen table. No documents between them, no strategy. Just quiet. "This is the part I was trying to avoid," he said. "What part?" "Personal cost." She didn't answer immediately. "I lost my sister," she said softly. "The cost was already paid." He looked at her carefully. "That doesn't mean you owe more." She held his gaze. "I'm not doing this because I owe," she said. "Then why?" She thought about that. Not the board, not the stock price, not even the research. "I don't want Mia growing up in a world where silence wins," she said finally. The words surprised her a little, but once they were spoken, they felt true. He didn't respond right away. Then he nodded. "That's reason enough." The federal inquiry moved faster than expected. Arthur Lennox was called in for questioning. Internal Longcrest communications were subpoenaed. Archived correspondence from 6 years ago resurfaced. And with it, proof. Not dramatic, not cinematic, just documented. A directive advising operational correction of the Skyline joint research due to excessive autonomy risk. Autonomy risk. Susan had been too independent, too unwilling to route oversight through external committees. She had stepped outside the architecture Lennox built, and he had closed the structure around her. The fire wasn't meant to kill her. It was meant to stop her. But intention didn't soften outcome. When the news broke that Lennox was stepping down pending criminal investigation, the markets convulsed again. Longcrest stock plummeted. Skyline stabilized. Victor Dane disappeared from public view. And somewhere in that storm, something inside Samantha grew very still. It wasn't victory. It wasn't relief. It was confirmation. Susan hadn't been reckless. She had been right. 2 weeks later, the charges were formal. Corporate sabotage, financial fraud, obstruction. The language was clinical, detached, but when Samantha read the summary alone in her office, her hands trembled slightly for the first time in days. Not from fear, from finality. It was real. She walked to the window and looked down at the city. Cars moved. People crossed streets. No one below knew what had shifted above them. That was the strange part. The world doesn't pause when something heavy settles. It just keeps moving. Her phone buzzed. "Luke." "It's done," he said quietly. "Yes." A pause. "You okay?" She looked out at the skyline. "I don't know yet." He understood that. They didn't celebrate. There was nothing to celebrate, only weight redistributed. That evening, she went to the river again. Alone. The air was colder now. Winter settling in. She stood where she used to meet Susan and let the silence come. She thought about the boardroom 5 days after the funeral. About Victor's careful tone. About the first time Luke said yes without hesitation. About Mia asking if she was sad. She still was. That hadn't changed. But something else had. The fear of stepping forward had thinned. The hesitation that once sat heavy in her chest before every decision. It wasn't gone. It just didn't control her anymore. Footsteps approached behind her. She didn't turn immediately. Luke stopped beside her. No words. Just presence. After a while, she said quietly, "It cost you." "Yes." "Your position." "Yes." "Regret it." He looked out over the water. "No." A pause. "Do you?" She shook her head slightly. "No." They stood there together, the city lights reflecting in the river like fractured lines. Not perfect, not stable, but real. She realized then that control had never been the goal. Not truly. It was responsibility. To the company. To the truth. To the small, quiet future forming in places she hadn't expected. Mia would ask hard questions. The board would challenge decisions. Markets would rise and fall. None of that frightened her now. Because she understood something she hadn't before. Power isn't what keeps people safe. Silence isn't what keeps systems stable. And grief doesn't disappear just because justice arrives. It stays. But it changes shape, and so does the person carrying it. When she finally turned from the river, she didn't feel lighter. She felt aligned. Not with the board, not with Longcrest, but with herself. And that was enough. The first morning after the charges were filed felt almost quiet. Too quiet. No cameras outside the building. No urgent calls waiting when she walked into Skyline. The markets had already absorbed the shock. Analysts had moved on to predictions, stability forecasts, projected recovery timelines, language that made chaos sound tidy. She stood in the lobby for a moment longer than necessary, watching employees badge in. Some smiled at her. Some looked relieved. A few looked wary. She understood all of it. Upstairs, Susan's old office no longer felt like a preserved space. The black ribbon had been removed from the lobby screen. Her photo was gone, not erased. Archived. Samantha stepped inside and closed the door. For weeks, this room had been a battleground. Board votes, legal strategy, press statements crafted carefully enough to hold shape under scrutiny. Now it was just a room again. She walked to the bookshelf and ran her fingers lightly along the spines. Susan used to organize them by color instead of topic. It had annoyed investors during video calls. She left them that way. Her phone buzzed once. A message from Luke. School drop-off went smoothly. She read it twice before responding. Good. There were no more sedans parked down the street. No verification calls to the school. Arthur Lennox had been denied bail, pending investigation. Lictor Dane had retained counsel and disappeared from view. It should have felt finished. It didn't. At 10, the board convened. No tension this time. No visible factions. Just the dull fatigue that follows public scandal. Hill cleared his throat. Given recent developments, we need to formally address leadership confirmation. The words hung in the air. 30 days ago, they had tried to replace her quietly. Now the tone had shifted. Pierce spoke next, less sharp than before. The market response post-disclosure has stabilized. Investor confidence is recovering. Miss Adler looked at Samantha directly. You handled this decisively. It wasn't praise, it was acknowledgement. Samantha kept her hands folded on the table. I handled what needed handling, she said. Hale nodded once. Then let's formalize it. The vote was not unanimous. 2 abstentions. But the majority was clear. Samantha Young confirmed as permanent CEO of Skyline Capital. There was no applause, no ceremony. Just signatures on paper and chairs sliding back. Afterward, she remained seated a moment longer while the others filed out. Victor's chair was empty. She looked at it without satisfaction. Only memory. That afternoon, she drove herself to Luke's house. No detours. No checking mirrors every few seconds. Mia opened the door before she knocked. You're smiling, Mia observed immediately. Samantha hadn't realized she was. A little, she admitted. Did you win again? Samantha crouched to eye level. I think we're done fighting for now. Mia considered that carefully. Okay, she said, as if filing it away. Inside, Luke watched the exchange quietly. Board vote? He asked. Yes. And it's official. He nodded once. No grand reaction. Just steady. Longcrest's interim leadership called, he said after a moment. They want a meeting. She leaned against the kitchen counter. To rebuild partnership? Yes. On what terms? He met her eyes. Yours. A quiet pause passed between them. It would be easy to make it about power again. About leverage. She didn't want that. No buried oversight, she said. Full transparency on joint research. Yes. And Susan's project restarts under independent supervision. Yes. He didn't hesitate. That mattered. Mia tugged on Luke's sleeve. Can we have dinner together tonight? Luke looked at Samantha. She felt the weight of the question differently than she would have weeks ago. Yes, she said. Mia smiled and ran off toward the hallway. Luke exhaled slowly. She's gotten used to you being here. I've gotten used to being here. The admission surprised her slightly, but it was true. This kitchen, the worn wooden table, the hum of a dishwasher running in the background, it had become familiar. Not strategic. Familiar. You could step back now, he said quietly. Focus only on Skyline. She looked at him carefully. Is that what you want? No. The answer came quickly. She nodded once. Then neither do I. Silence settled, but it wasn't heavy. Just real. Weeks passed. The research project resumed under new oversight. Carefully, transparently. Engineers returned to the lab with caution that bordered on reverence. The power unit that had been rewired was replaced entirely, not patched. Samantha visited often, not to control but to observe. To stand where Susan had stood. The first successful stabilized transfer under the new protocol wasn't dramatic. No cheering, just a quiet exhale from the lead engineer. It held, he said. Samantha nodded once. She stepped back and let them work. Later, alone in her office, she opened a drawer and took out the sticky note Susan had left in that box. Check the power override logs. The ink had faded slightly where her fingers had pressed it too many times. She didn't cry. She placed the note inside a frame instead, not on the wall, on her desk, where she could see it without anyone else needing to. One evening, months later, she stood in the backyard of Luke's house while Mia chased fireflies. The air was warmer now. Spring. Luke stood beside her. You're quieter these days, he said. Am I? Yes. She thought about that. The constant hum of urgency that had filled her chest since the funeral had softened, not disappeared. Softened. I don't feel like I'm bracing all the time, she said slowly. That's good. Yes. A pause. Does it feel over? He asked. She watched Mia laugh as she missed another firefly. No, she said honestly. It feels different. How? She searched for the right word. Integrated. He glanced at her. The grief, she clarified. It's not leading anymore. He nodded once. That doesn't mean it's gone. I know. They stood there without speaking for a while. Mia ran back toward them, cupping something in her hands. I caught one, she announced proudly. She opened her hands carefully. The small glow flickered between her fingers. Samantha leaned closer. Let it go, she said gently. Mia hesitated. Why? Because it isn't meant to stay in your hands. Mia considered that, then opened her palms. The firefly lifted, drifting upward into the dark. Mia watched it go without complaint. Samantha felt something shift inside her again. Not loss, release. She didn't need Skyline to prove anything anymore. Didn't need the board's approval to validate her place. Didn't need revenge to justify the fight. Susan's death had torn something open, but it had also revealed something she hadn't understood before. Strength wasn't loud. It wasn't the sharp edge of a boardroom argument. It was quieter. It was the decision to step forward even when stepping forward meant risk. It was choosing not to let fear dictate direction. It was standing by a river after everything fell apart and deciding to build anyway. Luke reached for her hand. Not dramatic, just steady. She let him. In the distance, the city lights glowed softly beyond the trees. Skyline continued. The research continued. Life continued, and for the first time since the funeral, she wasn't carrying the weight alone. Not because it had lightened, but because she had learned how to hold it without letting it bend her. That was the change. Not in the company, not in the headlines. Inside, quiet, permanent, enough.